Elias Cruz thought dying was the end, until he woke up 20 years in the past. Suddenly, he's young again, the city's alive, and the woman he lost is right there beside him. Sounds perfect, until reality starts to fall apart. Streets bend, clocks stop, and time itself starts fighting back. Every move he makes to fix his past just breaks his future even more. Now he's running out of moments, out of miracles, and maybe even out of existence. This is a second chance to live the life I dreamed, where love isn't the cure, it's the countdown. He died once. But when Elias opened his eyes again, time had rewound 20 years. The city was alive, his mistakes undone, and the woman he lost, Mara, was breathing beside him once more. It should have been a miracle. But every choice he changed began to break the world around him. Streets twisted. Clocks stopped. The sky bled light. Reality itself was rejecting his second chance. Now he's racing against fate, desperate to rewrite destiny before it erases him completely. Love gave him a reason to fight, but it might also be the thing that destroys everything he came back for. This is a second chance to live the life I dreamed. A story where time bends, love defies death, and the price of redemption might just be existence itself. The alarm buzzed in the dark, that same hollow sound that marked another day of existence rather than life. Elias Cruz opened his eyes to the gray ceiling above him, its cracks tracing stories he no longer cared to read. The city outside his window groaned awake, a chorus of engines, horns, and weary footsteps. He sat up slowly, the weight of years pressing against his chest. Once, his mornings began with sketches and color. Now, they began with coffee stains and deadlines. He moved through his apartment like a ghost. The walls were lined with old canvases turned to dust, half-finished dreams leaning against forgotten corners. His suit hung limp from a chair, another day in an office where time and ambition both went to die. As he adjusted his tie, he caught his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at him looked tired, but it wasn't just from sleep. It was from years of silence, of swallowing what he wanted to say, of living small. At work, the hours blurred. His fingers moved over the keyboard without thought, the screen glowing like an artificial sun. His co-workers laughed about promotions and vacations, but their voices faded into the background hum. Then, his phone buzzed. A name flashed across the screen, one he hadn't seen in years. Adrian Velasquez, his best friend, his brother in art. The message was short. He's gone. The funeral came 3 days later, under skies as pale as grief. The church smelled of wax and rain, the air heavy with words left unsaid. Elias stood before the casket, looking down at the man who once told him, "You don't paint for the world, you paint to breathe." He couldn't remember when he stopped breathing. Driving home, the rain fell harder, drumming against the windshield like an angry heart. The wipers swayed back and forth, but the road blurred through the tears he refused to acknowledge. Guilt filled the car, thick and suffocating, he whispered to the night. If only I had another chance. The headlights ahead swerved, tires screeched, and in the blinding flash of light, everything went silent. When Elias opened his eyes again, the air was warm. The sunlight was different, softer, real. The sound of distant traffic faded into the song of birds. He blinked, confused, staring at his hands. They were younger, unscarred by years of regret. Around him, the walls were alive with color. Posters of artists he admired, sketches pinned with tape, brushes scattered across the table. His old apartment, his old life. The calendar on the wall read 2005. His heart pounded in disbelief. Somehow, impossibly, he had been given what he begged for. A second chance to live the life he dreamed. Elias sat for hours, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever fragile miracle had unfolded. The memories of his old life clung to him. Every failure, every regret. But when he stepped outside, the scent of the world felt new again. The sky stretched wide and blue, the kind of blue he used to mix endlessly on his palette to get just right. He went to his old art studio, the one he had rented during his university days. The paint stains on the floor were still there, his handwriting scrawled across a sketchbook on the table. He turned the pages and felt a rush of nostalgia so strong it made his chest ache. This was the world he had once belonged to, before bills and fear pulled him away. In the days that followed, Elias tried to convince himself it was a dream. He called his mother, and her voice was younger, vibrant, full of warmth he hadn't heard in years. He met old friends for coffee and saw them before the world had hardened them. He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in forever. But beneath the wonder was fear. He remembered the choices that had led him astray, and he knew he couldn't repeat them. He began to paint again, tentatively at first. The brush felt strange in his hand, as if time had made him forget how to move with freedom. But color bled across the canvas, and soon the motions returned like muscle memory awakened. With each stroke, he felt a piece of his soul return. Yet every small change he made in his daily life sent subtle ripples outward. Things he didn't remember happening before began to shift. A friend who once moved away decided to stay. A class he never took was suddenly open to him. Elias felt the weight of possibility pressing on his shoulders. He could change everything now. He could fix what went wrong. But a quiet voice in the back of his mind whispered that fate was not so easily rewritten. Each night he dreamed of headlights slicing through the rain, of the sound of metal and glass. When he woke, the fear clung to him like mist. Still, he pressed on. He sketched through the night, driven by something beyond logic. A desperate need to make this second life matter. The world had given him another chance, and for the first time in years, Elias Cruz was not going to waste it. The days turned into weeks, and Elias began to feel the rhythm of his new old life settling around him. The once familiar streets were alive again, filled with the sound of distant laughter, the hum of traffic, and the soft glow of possibility that had long been missing from his memory. He walked differently now, lighter, as if his second chance had given him new bones, new breath. People noticed. Friends who once saw him as quiet and withdrawn now found him alive with purpose. He spoke with conviction, laughed louder, and carried a spark in his eyes that made others wonder what had changed. His art flourished. What had once been hesitation turned into a river of expression. Canvases filled his studio, each one capturing a moment, a reflection of a life rediscovered. He experimented with color and form, painting until the sunrise filtered through his window. Every stroke carried the energy of gratitude, every finished piece a quiet rebellion against the life he once wasted. Exhibitions came calling. A small local gallery reached out after seeing his work online, and the night of his first show felt like breathing for the first time. People stopped to study his pieces, murmuring words like, quote, alive, raw, honest. It felt surreal. But beneath the triumph, something began to shift. His smallest decisions seemed to cause the world to rearrange itself in subtle ways. He'd convince a friend not to take a job overseas, and that friend's partner would later meet someone they were never meant to. He'd help an old man on the street who, in his past life, he had walked by, and days later, a chain of events unfolded that led to a newspaper article about a stranger's misfortune. Elias started to notice the strange coincidences stacking like dominoes, the world adjusting itself in unpredictable patterns. He brushed off the unease at first. After all, wasn't this what he wanted? To do better? To make things right? But at night, when he tried to sleep, the dreams grew heavier. He would see the crash again, the wet asphalt, the twisting metal, the faint glow of headlights through the rain. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, gasping for air, the echo of his own voice whispering from the dream. You can't change everything. The more he tried to do good, the more he noticed the tension in the air around him. Friends argued over things that never used to matter. Relationships that once flowed easily began to fracture. It was as though his presence, his interference, was rewriting too much. The lines of fate were beginning to blur. One afternoon, while painting in the studio, he noticed a bird outside the window. It struck the glass and fell. In his old life, he would have ignored it, too caught up in deadlines to care. Now he rushed outside, lifting the small creature into his hands. It was trembling, fragile. He held it until it steadied, until its heartbeat matched his own. When it finally flew away, he smiled faintly. But as he turned, he saw the reflection of himself in the window. And, for a split second, it wasn't him. It was the older Elias, the one who had died in the crash, eyes hollow, face lined with regret. He stumbled back, heart pounding. When he looked again, the reflection was gone. He told himself it was exhaustion. He hadn't been sleeping. He had been living like every second mattered because deep down, he feared they might not last. The next morning, he received a call from his mother. Her voice shook as she told him his younger sister had been in an accident. Not fatal, but serious. The world froze. Elias drove to the hospital in a haze, his mind unraveling with questions. Had his actions somehow caused this? He thought about the times he had intervened, the choices he had altered, the ripples that had spread without his control. The guilt that once haunted him began to morph into something sharper. Fear. When he saw his sister lying in the hospital bed, pale but breathing, something in him broke. She smiled weakly and said, "You're painting again, I'm proud of you." He wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, he sat silently beside her, feeling the weight of invisible threads pulling tight around him. That night, he returned to his studio and stared at his unfinished painting. It was supposed to be a sunrise, bright, full of life, but now it looked like a storm. The colors bled together, the light swallowed by gray. He tried to fix it, but every brushstroke made it worse. The image distorted, becoming something else entirely. A road in the rain, a pair of headlights cutting through the dark. He dropped the brush, his breathing uneven. He began to realize the truth he had been avoiding. The world wasn't designed to be rewritten. Every act of kindness, every change, every moment he tried to alter carried unseen consequences. Fate wasn't cruel, it was precise. And by trying to control it, he was tearing it apart. Elias stood by the window looking out at the city lights, the same streets, the same stars, yet everything felt slightly off, like a painting that had been repainted too many times. He whispered to the night, "What am I doing?" The reflection of his older self flickered once more, faint but unmistakable, eyes filled with something between warning and sorrow. He turned away, gripping the edge of the table. His second chance had given him life, art, hope, but it had also given him a power he didn't understand. The ripples were growing, and he knew, deep down, that the price of changing fate had only just begun to show itself. Elias met her again on a late afternoon that smelled like rain and nostalgia. The sky hung heavy with clouds, the kind that painted the world in muted gold. He had gone to a small gallery downtown, one he used to visit years ago before life hardened him. And there she was, Mara, the woman whose absence had haunted him through the dull years of his first life. Her laughter drifted through the room, light but familiar, pulling him toward a memory he had buried under regret. In his first life, he had met her here too. She was an art curator then, full of opinions and warmth, a believer in the beauty of imperfection. Back then, he had let fear keep him from getting too close, afraid that love would become another thing he'd fail at. He had chosen ambition over connection, and spent years trying to forget her face. Now, standing before her again, time folded in on itself. Her smile was exactly as he remembered, soft, knowing, the kind that made the noise of the world disappear. They talked for hours as if 20 years had been erased. She remembered him vaguely as the quiet artist who painted storms. He laughed at that. He told her he was painting again, and she tilted her head with genuine joy. "Good," she said. "You always looked like you were meant to create, not just exist." Her words hit deeper than she could have known. Days turned into weeks, and their paths began to cross more often. By chance at first, then by intention. Coffee shop meetings became long evening walks. She told him about her dreams of opening her own gallery, a place for forgotten artists. He offered to help, sketching plans, designing layouts, painting pieces to fill the walls. He sat before a blank canvas, the brush trembling in his hand. He painted Mara, not as she was now, but as she had been in his first life. Her smile, the way her eyes caught the light, the softness of her presence. When he finished, he felt tears streak down his face. It was beautiful, but it hurt to look at. The painting seemed alive, pulsing faintly with warmth and sorrow. He realized then that he had made the same mistake twice, loving her more than the truth could bear. He couldn't keep her safe forever. Fate would find its way, and the more he tried to resist it, the more violent it would become. But even knowing that, he couldn't let her go. In the quiet hours before dawn, he whispered to the empty room, "I will not lose you again." The storm outside began to rise, thunder rolling through the city like the echo of something ancient. And somewhere deep inside him, a voice he could not silence whispered back, "Then you will lose yourself." The morning after the storm, Elias woke to a world that felt slightly off balance. The colors outside the window looked sharper, almost too vivid, while the air in his apartment felt heavy, thick with something unseen. He rubbed his eyes, convinced the sleepless nights had begun to distort his senses, but as he turned, he froze. The painting of Mara he had finished the night before was gone. The canvas still stood on the easel, but it was blank, wiped clean, as if no brush had ever touched it. He checked the floor, the walls, every corner, but there was nothing. The painting, the one that had felt alive, had simply vanished. Panic rose in his chest. He tried to rationalize it, but deep down he knew this was no accident. The world was pushing back. Fate, or whatever force governed this second life, was erasing what shouldn't exist. He picked up a brush and tried to repaint it, but every stroke dissolved into nothing. The colors wouldn't hold. The more he painted, the more the canvas resisted him, until the brush finally snapped in his hand. He stood in the silence that followed, staring at the blank surface, the air vibrating with quiet defiance. Days passed in a blur. Strange things began to happen more frequently. He would see people pause mid-sentence, eyes unfocused, like actors waiting for a cue. A man on the street greeted him using a name he didn't recognize. His phone rang with static on the other end, and when he looked at the call log, the number was from a decade in the future. Sleep became rare, dreams too vivid to bear. The crash returned every night. Rain, headlights, Mara's scream swallowed by the roar of thunder. Each time he woke, the line between his first life and his second grew thinner. Mara noticed his descent. She tried to pull him back, but the distance between them was widening. One evening, she found him sitting in the dark, surrounded by ruined canvases, his hands streaked with color. "Elias," she whispered, kneeling beside him, "you're scaring me." He looked at her, eyes hollow. "I think I broke something," he said quietly. "I don't know how to fix it." She held his face in her hands, tears glinting in her eyes. "Then, stop trying. Maybe you were never meant to fix it. Maybe you were just meant to live it." Her words lingered long after she left that night. He wanted to believe her, but the signs around him grew too violent to ignore. Electrical lights flickered when he walked into a room. Clocks stopped at random hours. Strangers looked at him like they'd seen a ghost. One afternoon, he watched a flock of birds freeze mid-flight for half a second before scattering in chaos. Time itself was cracking, and he knew he was the cause. Then came the dream that wasn't a dream. He found himself standing on the same road where the crash had happened. Rain fell in sheets, thunder echoing in the distance. Across the road, he saw his older self, the one who had died, standing beneath a flickering streetlight. The older Elias looked at him with weary eyes. "You were supposed to learn, not undo," the voice said. "You can't rewrite the ending without losing the meaning." Elias tried to speak, but the sound was swallowed by the storm. The older version of himself stepped closer, his face lined with sorrow. "You saved her once, now she'll pay the price for it." The universe doesn't take kindly to stolen time. He woke, gasping, the echo of his own voice still ringing in his ears. The phone was buzzing. It was Mara. Her voice was trembling. She told him she had been having nightmares too, ones where she drowned in rain and saw his face vanish into the dark. Elias tried to calm her, but every word he spoke felt like a lie. Deep down, he knew what was coming. The following week was quiet in a way that felt ominous. Elias tried to focus on his art, but inspiration had turned to obsession. He painted the same scene over and over again. The road, the crash, the moment before the light hit. He couldn't stop. The images seemed to come from somewhere beyond him, a warning he couldn't decipher. His hands trembled constantly, his reflection flickering between the man he was and the man he used to be. Then, one evening, the gallery called. They wanted to feature his work again. Mara was thrilled, insisting they celebrate. They met at the same place they first reconnected, and for a few precious hours, the world felt normal. She teased him for his seriousness, and he tried to laugh. But when she touched his hand, he felt something cold, something distant, like the pull of the tide before a storm. As they left the restaurant, rain began to fall. Mara offered to drive, but Elias's chest tightened with dread. He knew this night. He remembered this rain. Every instinct screamed at him to stop her, to change it again. But when he tried to speak, his throat closed. The universe, it seemed, had already made its decision. He followed her car through the wet streets, the rain growing heavier with each turn. His heartbeat synced with the rhythm of the wipers, the memory of the crash overlapping with the present moment. The lights ahead blurred into gold and white, and suddenly the world split. For a moment he saw both timelines, the one where he died and the one where he lived to lose her. The roads converged, reality bending around him like glass under pressure. He slammed the brakes, shouting her name, but the sound dissolved into thunder. A blinding flash filled the night, and for a second, everything stopped. Then, silence. No impact, no crash, just stillness. He stepped out of the car, trembling, the rain washing over him. Her car was stopped at the intersection, perfectly intact. She was safe, but something inside him shifted. The air felt thin, his vision dimming at the edges. He fell to his knees, hands shaking. He realized then that balance had been restored, not by chance, but by exchange. The universe had taken something from him again. His second life was unraveling, the seams of time coming apart thread by thread. As the rain eased, he looked up at the sky, whispering her name one last time. He felt the world tilting away, his body weightless, fading. And in that final flicker of consciousness, he understood. His second chance was never meant to change the past. It was meant to teach him how to let it go. Elias awoke to a world stitched together by fragments. The rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind was unnatural. The city outside his window moved in slow, uncertain rhythm, as though time itself was hesitant. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, half young, half old, the face shifting between the man who had died and the one still fighting to exist. He touched his skin, feeling both real and transparent, like his body no longer belonged to a single timeline. He didn't remember walking home. He didn't remember the road, the moment the lights vanished, the way his heart stopped. All he remembered was the look on Mara's face before the world went white. She had been safe, untouched, while the air around him fractured. He tried to tell himself it was worth it, that her safety justified everything, but the words rang hollow. Clocks stopped at random hours. Strangers looked at him like they'd seen a ghost. One afternoon, he watched a flock of birds freeze mid-flight for half a second before scattering in chaos. Time itself was cracking, and he knew he was the cause. Then came the dream that wasn't a dream. He found himself standing on the same road where the crash had happened. Rain fell in sheets, thunder echoing in the distance. Across the road, he saw his older self, the one who had died, standing beneath a flickering streetlight. The older Elias looked at him with weary eyes. "You were supposed to learn, not undo," the voice said. "You can't rewrite the ending without losing the meaning." Elias tried to speak, but the sound was swallowed by the storm. The older version of himself stepped closer, his face lined with sorrow. "You saved her once, now she'll pay the price for it." The universe doesn't take kindly to stolen time. He woke, gasping, the echo of his own voice still ringing in his ears. The phone was buzzing. It was Mara. Her voice was trembling. She told him she had been having nightmares too, ones where she drowned in rain and saw his face vanish into the dark. Elias tried to calm her, but every word he spoke felt like a lie. Deep down, he knew what was coming. The following week was quiet in a way that felt ominous. Elias tried to focus on his art, but inspiration had turned to obsession. He painted the same scene over and over again. The road, the crash, the moment before the light hit. He couldn't stop. The images seemed to come from somewhere beyond him, a warning he couldn't decipher. His hands trembled constantly, his reflection flickering between the man he was and the man he used to be. Then, one evening, the gallery called. They wanted to feature his work again. Mara was thrilled, insisting they celebrate. They met at the same place they first reconnected, and for a few precious hours, the world felt normal. She teased him for his seriousness, and he tried to laugh. But when she touched his hand, he felt something cold, something distant, like the pull of the tide before a storm. As they left the restaurant, rain began to fall. Mara offered to drive, but Elias's chest tightened with dread. He knew this night. He remembered this rain. Every instinct screamed at him to stop her, to change it again. But when he tried to speak, his throat closed. The universe, it seemed, had already made its decision. He followed her car through the wet streets, the rain growing heavier with each turn. His heartbeat synced with the rhythm of the wipers, the memory of the crash overlapping with the present moment. The lights ahead blurred into gold and white, and suddenly the world split. For a moment, he saw both timelines, the one where he died and the one where he lived to lose her. The roads converged, reality bending around him like glass under pressure. He slammed the brakes, shouting her name, but the sound dissolved into thunder. A blinding flash filled the night, and for a second, everything stopped. Then, silence. No impact, no crash. Just stillness. He stepped out of the car, trembling, the rain washing over him. Her car was stopped at the intersection, perfectly intact. She was safe, but something inside him shifted. The air felt thin, his vision dimming at the edges. He fell to his knees, hands shaking. He realized then that balance had been restored, not by chance, but by exchange. The universe had taken something from him again. His second life was unraveling, the seams of time coming apart thread by thread. As the rain eased, he looked up at the sky, whispering her name one last time. He felt the world tilting away, his body weightless, fading. And in that final flicker of consciousness, he understood. His second chance was never meant to change the past. It was meant to teach him how to let it go. Elias awoke to a world stitched together by fragments. The rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind was unnatural. The city outside his window moved in slow, uncertain rhythm, as though time itself was hesitant. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, half young, half old, the face shifting between the man who had died and the one still fighting to exist. He touched his skin, feeling both real and transparent, like his body no longer belonged to a single timeline. He didn't remember walking home. He didn't remember the road, the moment the lights vanished, the way his heart stopped. All he remembered was the look on Mara's face before the world went white. She had been safe, untouched, while the air around him fractured. He tried to tell himself it was worth it, that her safety justified everything, but the words rang hollow. His chest ached with a quiet dread, the kind that came from knowing he had crossed a line he could never return from. The following days blurred into a strange haze. He would wake and find objects moved in his apartment. Paintbrushes rearranged, doors open that he was sure he had closed. Sometimes, the clocks ran backward. Other times, he caught glimpses of people frozen mid-motion on the street, as if someone had pressed pause on reality. He painted through it all, not knowing why, only that he had to. The canvases piled up, each one darker than the last, distorted faces, broken streets, skies that bled into shadow. When Mara came to visit, he tried to hide the chaos. She stood at the doorway, hesitant, watching him paint with feverish intensity. "You haven't been answering my calls," she said softly. He didn't look up. "I've been busy." She took a step closer, her voice trembling. "Busy with what? You look like you haven't slept in days. Talk to me, Elias, please." He dropped the brush, color splattering across the floor, and finally turned toward her. His eyes were tired, haunted. "I think I'm disappearing," she frowned. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated, then told her everything. The accident, the crash, the moment he woke 20 years younger. How he had lived this life once before. How he had begged for another chance, and how fate had granted it only to punish his defiance. As he spoke, Mara's face went pale, disbelief flickering across her features. When he finished, the silence between them was unbearable. She shook her head slowly. "Elias, that's not possible. You're scaring me." He reached for her hand, desperate. "I'm not crazy. I've seen it happen. Every time I change something, the world reacts. The more I try to hold on to you, the more everything else falls apart." She pulled away, tears welling in her eyes. "You're talking like you control the universe. You can't live like this, Elias. You're chasing ghosts." His voice cracked as he whispered, "I'm the ghost." That broke her. She turned and left without another word, the sound of the door closing echoing like finality. After she was gone, the silence swallowed him whole. The paintings seemed to shift when he looked away, the eyes of his subjects watching him from the shadows. The city outside pulsed faintly, like a dying heart. He began to lose track of time, days bleeding into nights. His memories tangled, both versions of his life weaving together until he could no longer tell which was real. He remembered conversations that hadn't happened yet, faces from his first life appearing in crowds. The boundaries of existence were dissolving, and he was standing at the center of the unraveling. He tried to paint clarity into the chaos, but the images refused to stay still. The brush danced on its own, guided by something unseen. When he stepped back, he saw what it had created. A portrait of himself, older, eyes hollow, reaching out from a storm of light and rain. The sight froze him. He realized that this wasn't just a painting, it was a warning. The figure in the portrait wasn't a memory, it was what he was becoming. That night, the dreams returned, more vivid than ever. He stood in the same intersection where fate had first broken him, the same headlights burning through the storm. Across the road stood Mara, crying, reaching for him. But between them stretched an endless void. Every time he tried to cross, the world bent and pulled him backward. The voice came again, the same one he'd heard before, deep and sorrowful. "You were given time, Elias, not eternity." He screamed into the darkness. "Then why give me hope?" The voice answered, "To see what you would do with it." He woke gasping, the air cold, his body trembling. The portrait he had painted earlier was gone. In its place was a mirror, though he hadn't placed one there. When he stepped closer, his reflection didn't follow. The man in the mirror stared back at him with pity, then whispered words he couldn't hear. The glass rippled like water. Elias reached out, his hand shaking, but before he could touch it, the mirror shattered into dust. In the morning, he found Mara waiting outside his apartment. Her eyes were red, her voice raw. "I don't know if I believe you," she said, "but I can't let you go through this alone." He wanted to tell her to stay away, to run before fate noticed again, but he couldn't. Her presence grounded him, even as the world tilted further out of balance. For a moment, her touch brought warmth back into his cold, unraveling existence. They spent the day together, wandering through the city. Everything looked fragile, like the world was holding itself together just for them. Elias found himself studying her, memorizing the way her hair caught the light, the way she smiled even through confusion. He knew deep down this was temporary. The world was fraying, and when it finally tore, she would be the only real thing left. That evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline, they stood on the rooftop of his building, watching the city glow. Mara leaned against him and whispered, "If this is all a dream, I don't want to wake up." He closed his eyes, holding her closer. "Neither do I." For a fleeting moment, everything was still. The air was warm, the light golden. It felt almost like peace. But when he opened his eyes again, the skyline had shifted. Buildings stood where they shouldn't. The streets below were twisted into impossible patterns. The stars above flickered and rearranged, constellations bending into unfamiliar shapes. He felt the universe tremble, the edges of his reality folding in. Mara turned to him, her voice small. "Elias, what's happening?" He couldn't answer. He realized then that love had become his final rebellion. He had been given a chance to live again, to change his fate, and all he had done was cling harder to the things he feared losing. The second life was not a gift. It was a mirror, showing him the cost of trying to control what must be surrendered. He looked at Mara, the wind lifting her hair like a whisper. "If everything falls apart, remember this," he said softly. "We were real." She frowned, confused, but he smiled. a tired, accepting smile that carried both surrender and peace. The city below flickered once more, a final warning before the world began to unravel completely. And as the light fractured around them, Elias felt himself fading into the storm he had painted so many times, the colors of his two lives finally merging into one. The world had become a trembling reflection of itself, a fragile imitation of what once was. Elias walked through the streets that no longer obeyed logic. Buildings swayed like mirages. Shadows stretched too far, and the people moved in slow motion, faces blurred as if half remembered from dreams. He could feel it now, the collapse, the unraveling of everything that tethered him to existence. Every step he took echoed like a memory already fading, each sound swallowed by a silence that hummed beneath reality's surface. Mara stayed close beside him, her eyes wide, her breaths quick and shallow. "Why does everything look different?" she whispered, clinging to his arm. He didn't answer. He didn't know how to explain that this was the cost of his second chance. That every moment stolen from fate came with a price paid in the fabric of the world itself. He glanced up at the sky, where stars fell upward and clouds twisted into spirals of gold and ash. "It's happening faster now," he murmured. "The world's remembering what it's supposed to be." They found shelter in the old art studio where Elias had first learned to paint. The walls were cracked, but his work still hung there, paintings from both lives, blending timelines like overlapping dreams. He stood before one canvas in particular, a stormy seascape with a single figure reaching for light. "I painted this before the accident," he said quietly, "but I never finished it. It always felt wrong, like I wasn't painting what I saw, but what I feared." Mara touched the edge of the frame, her voice trembling. "And what did you fear?" He looked at her, his eyes tired but clear. "Losing the chance to make things right." The floor trembled beneath them, faint at first, then harder. Dust fell from the ceiling. The paintings began to shimmer, images rippling as if alive. Mara gasped as one portrait, the one of Elias himself, turned its head. The painted version of him stared out from the canvas, its lips moving without sound. Elias stepped closer, watching his painted eyes flicker with something like pity. "It's you," Mara whispered, "but older. Different." The voice came then, not from the painting but from the air itself. Low, steady, filled with sorrow. "You were never meant to come back." Elias froze. He recognized that voice. It was the same one from the dreams, the same one that had told him his time was borrowed. "Who are you?" he demanded, though part of him already knew. The air rippled, and for a heartbeat, he saw a shadow take shape. His own outline, but older, wearier, almost transparent. The figure spoke again, its tone neither cruel nor kind. "You asked for another life, and it was given. But life cannot be rewritten without consequence. Every moment you've lived twice has pulled a thread loose from the world." Mara stepped back, shaking her head. "This isn't real. It can't be." The shadow turned toward her, eyes glinting faintly. "He made it real." Elias clenched his fists. "I didn't ask for this. I just wanted to fix what I broke." The shadow's expression softened. "You tried to heal time with love. But love, Elias, is not a tool. It's an anchor. And you've tied it to a world that can't hold you anymore." The ground split slightly beneath their feet, thin cracks glowing with white light. Mara reached for him, panic rising in her voice. "We have to go!" But Elias didn't move. He couldn't tear his eyes from the shadow, the other version of himself, the one who had accepted the end. "If I let go," Elias whispered, "will she be safe?" The shadow nodded slowly. "She was always safe. You were the one lost." Tears welled in his eyes. He turned to Mara, who was trembling but still holding his hand. "You said you didn't want to wake up," he said softly. "But maybe this was never a dream. Maybe it was just me, refusing to let go." She shook her head, gripping him tighter. "Don't you dare leave me again. Not like this." He smiled sadly. "If I stay, none of this survives. You, me, Everything. It all breaks. Her voice cracked. Then let it break. The studio lights flickered, paintings peeling from the walls, color draining from the air. The world was collapsing into pure light. Elias felt the pull, the invisible current tugging at his soul. He could feel both versions of himself merging, the man who had died and the man who refused to stay dead. In that moment, everything made sense. His second life wasn't a miracle, it was a lesson in acceptance. He looked at Mara one last time, memorizing every detail, the curve of her lips, the tears in her eyes, the warmth of her hand in his. "I wanted to change fate," he said quietly. "But all I ever needed was to understand it." She tried to speak, but her voice broke. He leaned forward, pressed his forehead to hers, and whispered, "You'll remember me in the right time." Then he let go. The light swallowed him, the shadow fading with him, the studio dissolving into brightness. Mara screamed his name, reaching for him, but her hand met only air. The paintings vanished, the cracks sealed, and the world stilled. When the light dimmed, she was alone. The city outside looked whole again. The sky had returned to blue. Time, at last, had corrected itself. On the studio floor lay a single, unfinished canvas, a stormy seascape with a faint outline of two figures reaching for one another. In the bottom corner, where Elias had signed his name, a new word had appeared beneath it: enough. Mara fell to her knees, tears falling silently as she stared at the painting. She didn't understand how or why, but in her heart, she felt peace. Somewhere beyond the veil of time, Elias had found his rest. The world no longer trembled. The storm was over, weeks passed, though Mara could no longer tell time the way she used to. The city had grown quiet, eerily calm, as if the chaos had never happened. People went about their lives, unaware of what had been lost or who, but she remembered. Every night, she returned to the studio, unlocking the door as if stepping into another world. The air still carried his scent, a faint trace of paint and rain. The unfinished canvas sat where she had left it, its storm frozen mid-motion, the brush still resting beside it. She couldn't bring herself to move it. It felt like the last breath he had left behind. She spoke to him sometimes, softly, as though he could still hear her. "You were wrong, Elias," she would whisper. "The world didn't forget. I didn't." The words would hang in the still air, unanswered, but comforting in their own way. She began painting again, at first hesitantly, her hands trembling as she tried to mimic his strokes. But the more she painted, the more the fear faded. The images that emerged were gentler. Fields of light, hands reaching upward, skies clearing after storms. Each canvas felt like a conversation she was continuing, one brushstroke at a time. One evening, as the sun melted into gold through the studio windows, she noticed something she hadn't before. The seascape, the last painting he touched, had changed. The light in the waves shimmered faintly, and where there had once been only storm clouds, there was now a soft break in the sky. She stepped closer, her heart pounding. The paint was dry, yet the scene had shifted subtly, as if the world within it was still alive. "Elias?" she whispered. Nothing moved, but the light through the window bent just enough to make the water on the canvas sparkle. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out, fingertips grazing the paint. For a brief second, she felt warmth radiate from the surface, a heartbeat that wasn't hers. It vanished as quickly as it came, but she smiled through the tears. "You're still here," she breathed. "Somewhere, you're still here." She sat down, staring at the painting until the room dimmed into twilight. The world outside continued to turn. But in that small space, time stood still. In the days that followed, she began to rebuild her life. She returned to teaching at the Art Institute, guiding students who reminded her of the man she once loved. Dreamers, bold and uncertain, chasing meaning through color and form. She told them that art wasn't about control but surrender, that sometimes the most powerful creations come from letting go of what you fear to lose. When they asked where she learned that, she would smile faintly and say, "From someone who lived twice to teach it." The studio became a quiet sanctuary again, filled with light and the hum of creation. She finished Elias's seascape at last, adding a small detail he never had, a figure standing at the edge of the shore, gazing toward the horizon. She didn't sign her name beneath his. Instead, she wrote only one word below the title, "Together." Late one night, after locking the studio, she paused by the door. The air felt different, softer, almost lighter. For a moment, she thought she heard footsteps behind her, slow and familiar. When she turned, no one was there. Only the faint scent of rain lingered. She smiled to herself, whispered goodnight, and walked into the calm of the evening. Far beyond her world, in the quiet between moments, Elias watched the sea he had once painted unfold into eternity. The storm had passed, and the light stretched endless across the horizon. He stood barefoot on the shore of a world unbound by time, feeling the gentle pull of peace. Somewhere far away, someone was painting the same sea, and he could feel her presence in every wave. He smiled, knowing she was free, knowing at last that they both were. And as the tide rolled forward, washing away the echoes of the past, Elias whispered into the wind the same words that had once broken him but now set him free. "This time," he said softly, "I lived." Years drifted by, gentle and unhurried. Mara's hair turned silver, though her eyes still carried the same quiet fire that once drew Elias to her. The studio had grown into a small gallery, its walls lined with pieces inspired by their story. Paintings that told of love reborn, of time undone, of finding peace after loss. Visitors came from far and wide, drawn to the strange beauty of her work. They often asked where her inspiration came from, and she would simply smile and say, "From a life that taught me to see beyond what ends." One afternoon, she sat by the window as sunlight poured across the floor. The air shimmered faintly, the same way it had the day she felt him near. She had grown used to those moments, small ripples in the stillness that felt like his presence brushing past her. Sometimes, a brush would roll on its own. Sometimes, a half-open door would close softly. She no longer feared it. It was his way of reminding her that love, once real, never truly vanished. It only changed shape. Her hands, though slower now, still moved with grace when she painted. The newest piece before her was a return to the sea, the same endless expanse that had once been their symbol. This time, though, it was calm. The storm clouds were gone, replaced by a horizon bathed in dawn light. She paused, staring at the blank space near the center of the canvas, and for the first time in years, she picked up a second brush. She placed it beside her, as she used to when Elias painted next to her. "For you," she whispered. A soft wind stirred through the open window, cool and tender. The scent of rain filled the air, though the skies were clear. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "I know," she said quietly. "You never really left." She dipped her brush into the paint, her hand steady, and together, her and the unseen echo beside her, they began to create. The strokes felt effortless, guided by something larger than memory. The sea took shape, then the shore, then two figures standing hand in hand at the edge of the water. When she finished, she leaned back and let the brush fall. Her breathing slowed as warmth spread through her chest. The light in the room grew soft, golden, and somewhere deep inside she felt the boundary between worlds begin to thin. Her eyes fluttered shut, her lips curving into a peaceful smile. The painting before her glowed faintly, the colors alive with motion. The two figures on the shore began to walk toward the horizon, side by side, fading into the rising light. By the next morning, the gallery was silent. Visitors found Mara still seated by the window, a serene expression on her face. The final painting gleamed softly, the signature at the bottom written in two hands, one delicate, one firm. Beneath it were three simple words, "We are home." Outside, the world continued, as always. The wind carried the scent of rain across the city, and the sea in the distance shimmered under the morning sun. Somewhere beyond time, Elias and Mara walked together through that endless light, the storm long behind them, their second chance complete. Their love, no longer bound by life or death, had become the very air that lingered between each sunrise, a quiet promise that every ending could be rewritten into peace. The world turned, seasons shifted, and life continued its quiet rhythm. Time had folded their story into memory, yet echoes of Elias and Mara lingered everywhere, in the sea that glimmered beneath sunrise, in the wind that carried the scent of rain, in the brushstrokes of countless dreamers who painted what they could not name. Their love had outlived its mortal shape, becoming something vast and unseen, woven into the pulse of creation itself. In the stillness between night and morning, when the world held its breath, their voices could almost be heard, soft laughter, distant, timeless. Not haunting, but guiding. They had found what they were denied before. Not perfection, not control, but peace. The kind that comes when one stops fighting the inevitable and chooses to embrace it instead. And so their story ended where all true beginnings lie. In surrender, in forgiveness, in love that needs no second chance because it never truly ends. The canvas of their lives, once torn by regret, had been mended by understanding. Beneath the eternal light of dawn, their souls walked as one, forever home, forever free.